Let me tell you something profound about silence, because silence is never empty. Silence is loud. Silence is teaching. Silence is programming. To an avoidant in love, silence feels like control. It feels like power. It feels like, I'm safe because I don't need. But here's a truth that changes everything. Silence doesn't protect the avoidant heart. It isolates it. You see, the avoidant learned early that closeness equals danger, that dependence equals loss of self. So when emotions rise, when connection asks for courage, the instinct is to retreat, to go quiet, to disappear. And in that moment, silence feels like relief. But relief is not freedom. Silence trains the nervous system to shut down instead of step up. It whispers, you survive by being alone, so stay alone. And the mind believes it. The body memorizes it. The soul suffers from it. Because love, real love, requires presence. And presence requires courage. Silence doesn't stop pain. It postpones it. Silence doesn't end conflict. It multiplies misunderstanding. Silence doesn't create peace. It creates distance, and distance eventually becomes loneliness. Here's the divine paradox. The very thing the avoidant fears, connection, is the medicine they need. And the very thing they use to stay safe, silence, is what keeps them stuck. When an avoidant goes silent, they're not calm inside. Their mind is loud. Their stories are running wild. They're rehearsing independence, justifying withdrawal, convincing themselves they're fine. But the heart knows the truth. It wants to be seen, not protected. Silence protects the ego, but it starves the heart. And the soul? The soul was never designed to hide. It was designed to express, to connect, to expand through love. Love is not about losing yourself. Love is about bringing your full self forward. And silence robs the world of who you really are. So here's the breakthrough. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's strength in motion. Speaking is not surrender. It's leadership. Staying present in discomfort is not danger. It's growth. When the avoidant chooses to break the silence, something extraordinary happens. The nervous system learns safety and connection. The heart learns it can be held. The soul remembers its purpose, to love boldly, not cautiously. Silence keeps you surviving. Expression allows you to live. And the moment you stop hiding behind silence, you don't lose yourself. You finally come home to who you were always meant to be. Silence feels like safety to an avoidant because it creates the illusion of control. When words stop, when communication pauses, the avoidant nervous system experiences a momentary calm. There's no demand, no expectation, no emotional pull that feels overwhelming. In that quiet space, the avoidant believes they are protected. Protected from conflict, protected from dependency, protected from the possibility of being needed too much or needing someone in return. Silence becomes a shield, a way to regulate emotions without having to rely on another person. But what feels like safety on the surface is often a survival strategy learned long ago. For the avoidant, silence is not neutral, it is familiar. It echoes early experiences where emotional closeness may have felt intrusive, inconsistent, or unsafe. Instead of comfort being found in connection, comfort was found in self-reliance. Over time, the nervous system learned that pulling back reduced anxiety faster than leaning in. Silence became the fastest path to relief, and relief was mistaken for healing. This is where the quiet danger begins. Silence doesn't resolve the emotional experience. It freezes it. While the avoidant may feel calmer externally, internally the emotions do not disappear. They simply go underground, unspoken. Thoughts, unmet needs, and unresolved feelings continue to exist beneath the surface, quietly shaping beliefs and reactions. The avoidant may tell themselves they are fine, that they don't care, that distance means strength. Yet the body keeps the score. The heart remembers what the mouth refuses to express. Silence also reinforces the belief that independence equals safety. Every time an avoidant withdraws and survives the moment alone, the brain logs it as proof, I didn't need anyone, and I'm okay. This reinforces emotional self-sufficiency as the ultimate virtue, while slowly eroding the capacity for intimacy. Over time, silence stops being a choice and becomes an automatic response. Connection triggers withdrawal before awareness even has a chance to intervene. What makes this pattern so deceptive is that silence appears peaceful. There are no arguments, no dramatic confrontations, no emotional messiness. But peace without connection is not peace. It is emotional numbness disguised as stability. The avoidant may function well, appear composed, even confident, while slowly disconnecting from their deeper emotional world. Relationships begin to feel flat, distant, or draining, not because love is absent, but because it is never fully allowed in. Silence also distorts reality. In the absence of communication, the mind fills in the gaps. Assumptions replace conversations. Fears replace facts. The avoidant may silently rewrite the story of the relationship to justify withdrawal. They want too much, I'm better on my own, this wouldn't work anyway. These narratives feel true because they go unchallenged. Silence gives them space to grow unchecked, solidifying emotional distance that didn't need to exist. Most importantly, silence feeds disconnection from the self. The avoidant doesn't just go quiet with their partner, they go quiet with their own needs. They stop asking themselves what they feel, what they want, what they fear. Emotional awareness becomes dulled because awareness would demand expression, and expression feels risky. Over time, the avoidant may feel disconnected not only from others but from their own inner world, unsure of what they truly desire and love. What began as a strategy for safety quietly becomes a barrier to fulfillment. Silence may reduce immediate discomfort, but it also reduces intimacy, depth, and emotional aliveness. It creates a life that feels manageable but not nourishing, controlled but not connected. And while the avoidant may believe silence keeps them safe, it is actually teaching the heart to live without the very thing it longs for most, genuine, secure connection. Silence reinforces the belief that independence equals survival because, for the avoidant, withdrawal is not just a habit, it is a lifeline. From early experiences, many avoidant individuals internalized the message that leaning on others was risky, that depending on someone could result in disappointment, rejection, or loss of self. Over time, the mind creates a narrative. If I rely on anyone, I expose myself to danger. The only way to survive is to rely on myself, and silence becomes the tool to enforce that belief. Each time the avoidant retreats, each time they withhold words, feelings, or needs, they train themselves to trust only their own inner world, not the emotional safety of connection. In the moment, silence feels protective. It reduces the immediate anxiety that comes with vulnerability, emotional exposure, or the unpredictability of another person's response. There is a sense of control over what is shared, control over emotional risk, control over how deeply one can be affected by another's presence or absence. This sense of control can be intoxicating because it creates the illusion that the avoidant is mastering their emotional environment. Yet beneath that sense of control lies an invisible cost. By avoiding dependence, they are also avoiding intimacy, and by avoiding intimacy, they are avoiding growth. The belief that independence equals survival becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Every act of silence reinforces the notion that being alone is safer than being seen. Every emotional withdrawal is proof that the world is too risky, that connection is too demanding, that vulnerability is too dangerous. The brain interprets these behaviors as evidence I survived another emotional storm by staying detached. Therefore, detachment is my strategy for safety. Over time, this belief solidifies, not just in the avoidance behavior toward others, but in their relationship with themselves. Independence is no longer simply a preference. It is perceived as a necessity, a shield against potential pain. Yet this belief comes with consequences that often go unnoticed. Independence alone does not provide fulfillment, love, or emotional growth. It provides security, but only a limited form of it. The avoidant may appear strong, self-sufficient, and unshakable on the outside, but internally silence reinforces isolation and emotional disconnection. The paradox is profound. The very strategy designed to ensure survival, detachment simultaneously, prevents the deep, nurturing experiences that make life meaningful. Silence also amplifies the avoidant's internal narrative about the dangers of closeness. Every time the avoidant observes another person reaching out and resists the impulse to respond fully, it validates the internal story that attachment is risky and reliance is dangerous. Emotional openness is reframed as weakness, and emotional restraint is reframed as strength. The nervous system learns to perceive intimacy as a threat and solitude as a refuge. Over time, this becomes almost automatic. The avoidant reacts to emotional cues by withdrawing without conscious thought, perpetuating a cycle where independence feels necessary for survival. Ironically, this belief prevents the avoidant from truly experiencing the security and support that comes from healthy relationships. While independence may reduce immediate anxiety, it also prevents the development of trust and mutual reliance, which are essential components of long-term emotional safety. The avoidance life becomes a careful balance of managing distance, controlling exposure, and maintaining self-sufficiency, rather than embracing the dynamic richness of connection where vulnerability is met with understanding and support. Ultimately, silence is both a symptom and a reinforcement of the avoidant mindset. It reassures the mind that independence is essential for survival, even as it quietly undermines the heart's capacity to engage fully in love. Each quiet moment, each withheld word, each suppressed feeling strengthens the internal narrative that self-reliance is the only path to safety. Yet in reinforcing survival through detachment, the avoidant simultaneously distances themselves from the very experiences, trust, intimacy, shared growth, that could teach them that true security is not found in isolation, but in connection that is nurtured, respected, and embraced. Silence amplifies internal narratives rather than resolving real issues, because, for the avoidant, withdrawing does not stop the mind from processing experiences. It accelerates mental storytelling. When words are left unsaid, feelings are left unshared, and conflicts are left unaddressed, the mind does not rest. Instead, it fills the empty space with explanations, justifications, fears, and assumptions. What the avoidant experiences as a moment of calm or safety is actually a period of intense mental activity. The mind begins to replay interactions, rewrite conversations, and construct elaborate narratives to explain why they pulled back, why connection feels unsafe, and why vulnerability is dangerous. This internal narrative often becomes more persuasive than reality itself. Without dialogue or feedback, the avoidance interpretations take on a sense of truth. The more they retreat into silence, the more their mind tells them stories like they are too demanding, I cannot handle this closeness, or I will be overwhelmed if I open up. Each silent moment reinforces these narratives, giving them emotional weight and making them feel unassailable. The problem is that these narratives are rarely accurate representations of the other person or the situation. They are filtered through fear, past conditioning, and self-protective reasoning. What makes this process so insidious is that silence creates a feedback loop. The more the avoidant withdraws, the louder these internal stories become, and the more compelling they feel. The avoidant then uses these narratives to justify further withdrawal, believing that their decisions are rational, safe, or necessary. But this logic is circular. Silence does not provide clarity or resolution. It merely magnifies anxieties, reinforces biases, and deepens emotional distance. The avoidant may believe they are avoiding pain, but in reality they are often generating it internally in a constant loop of worry, doubt, and imagined consequences. Silence also prevents reconciliation with reality. Issues that could be addressed through communication remain unresolved, while the avoidance mind turns them into proof that connection is unsafe. Small misunderstandings grow into imagined catastrophes. Neutral behaviors are interpreted as rejection. Moments of minor tension are seen as confirmation that closeness is dangerous. Because nothing is spoken, nothing clarified. And the avoidance mental story takes precedence over actual events. Their internal narrative becomes the default reality, replacing observation with imagination, suspicion with certainty, and fear with conviction. This amplification of internal narratives does more than shape perception of others. It shapes the avoidance perception of self. In silence, they often replay past mistakes, criticize their responses, and reinforce beliefs such as, I am too much, I cannot meet expectations, or I am not worthy of love. These self-narratives compound the sense of separation, creating a deep internal pressure that can feel unbearable. Silence does not quiet the mind. It gives the mind a stage on which to rehearse anxieties endlessly. Ironically, while silence seems like avoidance of conflict, it often intensifies it internally. The avoidant may appear calm outwardly, but their internal world becomes a storm of doubts, fears, and hypothetical outcomes. Every unspoken word, every unmet need, and every avoided conversation becomes fuel for this internal drama. Instead of finding peace, the avoidant becomes trapped in a continuous cycle of mental elaboration that can feel exhausting, isolating, and self-reinforcing. Ultimately, silence magnifies the gap between perception and reality. While it feels protective, it is actually amplifying fears and assumptions that have little grounding in what is actually happening. The avoidant may think that by withholding words or retreating emotionally, they are resolving tension or avoiding pain, but what is really happening is that their internal narrative grows unchecked, shaping beliefs, emotions, and behaviors in ways that distance them further from authentic connection. Silence, rather than resolving issues, becomes the medium through which fear, avoidance, and imagined threats flourish. Silence delays healing by avoiding vulnerability, not pain. Because for the avoidant, withdrawal is often mistaken for resolution. When faced with emotional intensity, whether it's conflict, desire for closeness, or fear of rejection, the avoidant instinctively retreats. They go quiet. They withdraw. And in that moment, it feels like they have escaped the challenge. The anxiety eases, the heart rate slows, and there's a sense of temporary relief. But what the avoidant fails to recognize is that the relief is superficial. Silence does not address the underlying emotional truth. It merely postpones its expression. The pain, the need, and the longing remain, quietly building beneath the surface, waiting for attention that never arrives. The danger of this pattern is that it transforms avoidance into a form of pseudo-healing. By not engaging, the avoidant convinces themselves that nothing needs to be resolved. They may repeat mantras like, "It's fine, I can handle this on my own," or "If I ignore it, it will go away." These statements feel empowering in the moment because they reduce immediate discomfort. But in truth, silence does not neutralize pain. It simply buries it. Emotional wounds are not healed by absence. They are healed by acknowledgement, by presence, and by connection. When an avoidant retreats, the wound remains active, its energy circulating in the body, reinforcing the belief that vulnerability is dangerous and dependence is risky. This avoidance of vulnerability also affects relationships deeply. By delaying the expression of feelings, needs, or fears, the avoidant unintentionally communicates detachment to their partner. Even if the partner understands the avoidance style, silence can trigger confusion, hurt, and a sense of emotional abandonment. The avoidance intention is rarely to harm, it is to protect, but the effect is the opposite. Silence pushes others away while pretending to protect oneself. Over time, repeated withdrawals create patterns of mistrust, distance, and frustration in relationships. The more the avoidant relies on silence, the more entrenched these relational gaps become, and the harder it is to reestablish true connection. Silence also interferes with the avoidant's relationship with themselves. Avoidant individuals often experience inner tension or unacknowledged emotions during moments of quiet retreat. By avoiding vulnerability, they avoid seeing the truth of their desires, fears, and disappointments. They may numb themselves with distractions, logic, or work, convincing themselves they are coping, but avoidance never cultivates clarity. Instead, it fosters stagnation. Emotional growth requires stepping into discomfort, naming feelings, and tolerating uncertainty. Silence, by contrast, provides only temporary comfort at the expense of development. There is also a physiological element to consider. Avoiding emotional engagement keeps the nervous system in a heightened state of readiness. The body remembers the stress, even if the mind believes it has escaped. The cortisol of suppressed fear, anxiety, and longing circulates, creating chronic tension. This is why avoidance may feel restless, irritable, or emotionally fatigued despite appearing calm. The healing that comes from vulnerability is not only emotional, it is somatic. By avoiding it, the avoidant prolongs not just psychological discomfort but physical tension as well. Ironically, avoidance often amplifies the very pain it seeks to escape. Unspoken truths, unexpressed desires, and hidden fears do not vanish, they intensify over time. Silence creates a buildup of unresolved emotions that can erupt unexpectedly, often in ways that feel disproportionate to the situation. This is the paradox of avoidance. Retreating from vulnerability in the short term seems protective, but in the long term it magnifies anxiety, confusion, and relational strain. In essence, silence gives the illusion of healing, but it is not healing, it is delay. True healing requires presence, being willing to feel fully, communicate openly, and engage with the vulnerability that avoidance fears. By avoiding vulnerability, the avoidant may escape discomfort momentarily, but they cannot escape the underlying emotional truths that demand attention. Healing is never found in absence. It is always found in courage, connection, and the willingness to let the heart speak. Silence creates emotional distance that eventually turns into loneliness because withdrawing may feel safe in the short term, but over time it erodes connection, intimacy, and mutual understanding. For the avoidant, silence often begins as a strategy to manage overwhelming emotions, reduce perceived threats, or maintain a sense of control in relationships. When conflict arises or vulnerability is required, retreating into silence provides temporary relief. It quiets the nervous system, protects the ego, and gives the illusion of stability. But this protective mechanism comes at a profound cost. The space that silence creates between the avoidant and their partner does not remain neutral. It widens, deepens, and eventually hardens into a chasm that separates hearts. The avoidant often misinterprets silence as strength. They may believe that by withholding words, avoiding confrontation, or emotionally detaching, they are preserving independence or protecting themselves from hurt. In reality, silence is an agent of disconnection. Every unspoken word, every withheld feeling, and every avoided discussion adds another layer to the emotional distance. What began as a temporary retreat slowly becomes a habitual barrier, preventing authentic engagement and emotional resonance. The partner may sense this distinct, experience confusion, or feel unacknowledged. But the avoidant often remains unaware of the emotional toll that their silence inflicts. Loneliness is the inevitable outcome of this emotional distance. Human beings are wired for connection. We are designed to share, to feel seen, and to be mirrored in our emotional experiences. Silence interrupts this process. When an avoidant withdraws, they deny not only their partner but themselves the fullness of relational intimacy. They may convince themselves that independence is sufficient, that solitude is preferable to potential pain, and that emotional closeness is unnecessary. Yet beneath this rationalization lies a deeper truth. The avoidant longs for connection, even as they resist it. The paradox is that the very act of self-protection, the retreat into silence, creates the isolation they fear most. The cycle reinforces itself. As silence grows, the avoidant experiences less feedback, less affirmation, and fewer moments of shared vulnerability. The partner may distance themselves emotionally, not because they want to, but because they are responding to the avoidant's withdrawal. The avoidant interprets this distancing as further confirmation that closeness is dangerous or undesirable. They see the growing gap and conclude that it validates their belief in self-sufficiency. In reality, the gap is the product of avoidance, and it widens precisely because silence is allowed to dictate the relational dynamic. Silence also impedes problem-solving and reconciliation. Unspoken tensions do not dissolve on their own, they fester. Misunderstandings grow, resentments accumulate, and small disagreements turn into larger emotional divides. Without communication, there is no opportunity for repair or mutual understanding. Emotional distance, once established, becomes self-perpetuating. The longer silence persists, the more difficult it becomes to bridge the gap. Each day of unexpressed thought and suppressed feeling strengthens the walls of isolation, making connection feel increasingly risky. This emotional distance eventually manifests as profound loneliness. It is a subtle loneliness, often masked by activity, work, or distractions, but it is real and persistent. The avoidant may feel disconnected not only from their partner but also from themselves, as emotional expression and authenticity are muted. Loneliness is a natural consequence of avoidance. It is the heart's reminder that true connection requires risk, courage, and vulnerability. Even the avoidance moments of comfort and solitude carry a quiet cost. The temporary relief of silence cannot substitute for the deep satisfaction of shared presence, trust, and emotional attunement. The more they rely on silence to navigate relational stress, the more isolated they become, and the more their natural desire for closeness is thwarted. Emotional distance, maintained by silence, is not neutral. It is a slow accumulation of absence, longing, and unmet potential. Ultimately, silence does not create safety in love, it creates separation. It shields in the short term but isolates in the long term. Emotional distance grows quietly, invisibly, until it manifests as a pervasive loneliness that no amount of independence, distraction, or rationalization can fully mask. The heart, left unspoken, feels the void, and the avoidant, despite their efforts to protect themselves, is left to face the profound cost of their silence. A life where connection is feared, intimacy is deferred, and loneliness becomes an inevitable companion. Expand key point 6 into 600 words without heading and conclusion. Silence protects the ego but starves the heart because, for the avoidant, withdrawal is often less about peace and more about self-preservation. The ego, that part of ourselves concerned with image, control, and perceived strength, finds safety in silence. By not speaking, not expressing needs, and not showing vulnerability, the avoidant convinces themselves and often others that they are independent, composed, and emotionally self-sufficient. Silence becomes a tool for maintaining dignity and avoiding perceived weakness. It allows the avoidant to create a sense of mastery over their emotions and over the relationship, a buffer against uncertainty and potential rejection. In this way, the ego thrives, feeling reinforced and protected in its fortress of control. Yet while the ego may feel fortified, the heart suffers in profound ways. Emotional nourishment comes from connection, from the exchange of feelings, and from the courage to be seen. By retreating into silence, the avoidant denies themselves this essential sustenance. The heart, left without expression, begins to weaken. Feelings that could have been shared, desires that could have been met, and vulnerabilities that could have been embraced are instead locked away unseen and unmet. Over time, the avoidant may feel an internal emptiness, a quiet ache that logic and independence cannot soothe. The ego may declare, "I am fine," but the heart quietly whispers, "I am hungry for love and understanding." This dynamic creates a profound internal tension. The avoidant experiences the illusion of control while simultaneously feeling a deep, often unacknowledged longing for closeness. Silence seems protective because it shields the ego from the discomfort of vulnerability and the risk of rejection. But this same silence starves the heart of the very experiences that give life meaning, intimacy, emotional attunement, and authentic connection. The avoidant may appear composed externally, but internally, there is a persistent sense of isolation and unfulfilled desire that only grows strong. Anger with time, moreover, silence reinforces the belief that emotional suppression equals strength. The avoidance ego interprets avoidance as mastery. I can endure, I can survive, I am self-reliant. Yet what the ego interprets as resilience is often a mask for unmet emotional needs. The heart, deprived of expression, begins to accumulate longing and frustration, which can eventually erupt in ways that feel sudden, overwhelming, or confusing. The very mechanism designed to protect the self from emotional pain paradoxically intensifies the pain of disconnection. Silence also diminishes the avoidant's ability to fully experience joy and love. Love is reciprocal, and the exchange of feelings is the lifeblood of relational fulfillment. When silence dominates, the avoidant withholds both giving and receiving emotional expression. Even when moments of closeness occur, the heart may remain partially closed, cautious, and guarded. The ego may feel triumphant in its restraint, but the heart knows that true intimacy is incomplete, that full emotional engagement has been denied. Over time, the avoidant learns to rely on silence as a default coping mechanism. It becomes automatic, a reflex that protects the ego in every challenging moment. The mind feels secure, the image of strength maintained, but the emotional body begins to atrophy. The heart becomes less capable of trusting, less capable of expressing, and less capable of experiencing the vulnerability necessary for deep connection. Silence, while initially seeming safe, slowly starves the very capacity for love that the avoidant secretly craves. Ultimately, the avoidant is caught in a paradox. They protect the ego through silence, yet in doing so they starve the heart. The self feels secure, but the soul feels incomplete. Emotional survival comes at the cost of emotional life. The ego may feel victorious, but the heart pays the price. The deeper truth is that real strength is not in withdrawal or detachment. It is in the courage to open, to speak, and to allow oneself to be fully known. Until the avoidant breaks the pattern of silence, the heart remains hungry, longing for the nourishment that only vulnerability and connection can provide. Silence trains the nervous system to shut down instead of opening up because, for the avoidant, withdrawal is not just a behavioral habit, it is a physiological response. When emotions rise, when intimacy demands courage, or when vulnerability feels threatening, the avoidant nervous system interprets these cues as danger signals. In response, it activates a survival mode, fight, flight, or freeze. Silence is the chosen strategy of avoidance. It is the freeze response in action. By going quiet, withdrawing, or emotionally distancing, the avoidance signals to their nervous system that danger has been managed. The immediate threat appears neutralized, anxiety diminishes, and a sense of control is temporarily restored. But the nervous system is not healed. It is habituated to shut down as a default coping mechanism. This habitual shutdown has long-term consequences for emotional regulation. Each time the avoidant withdraws, the body learns that discomfort or vulnerability should be met with stillness and disengagement, rather than openness and expression. The nervous system adapts, creating a reinforced pathway where connection triggers caution and emotional exposure triggers retreat. Over time, this becomes almost automatic. The avoidant may not even consciously choose silence. It happens reflexively. Their body, trained through years of avoidance, interprets relational closeness as a potential threat, responding by constricting, detaching, and closing off emotionally. The cost of this pattern is profound, because shutting down the nervous system is not a protective measure. It is a barrier to growth. Emotional development relies on experiencing vulnerability, tolerating discomfort, and engaging with connection. When the avoidant consistently defaults to silence, the nervous system never learns that closeness can be safe. Opportunities to experience trust, empathy, and mutual understanding are bypassed. Each act of withdrawal reinforces the idea that emotional exposure is dangerous, and each reinforced pattern makes it increasingly difficult for the avoidant to relax, open, or fully engage in intimacy. Silence also prevents the nervous system from achieving balance. Healthy emotional systems alternate between activation and relaxation. Feeling emotions, expressing them, and receiving response from another human being teaches the nervous system that emotional states are manageable and temporary. Avoidance disrupts this rhythm. When the avoidant goes silent, the nervous system remains in a semi-activated state, physiologically alert, emotionally guarded, and chronically anticipating potential harm. This creates a feedback loop in which connection itself becomes anxiety-provoking. The body remembers past patterns of withdrawal as protective, even when the present moment is safe. Additionally, the avoidant's nervous system becomes less capable of co-regulation, the ability to synchronize with another person's emotional state. Co-regulation is a critical component of secure attachment. It is the mechanism by which humans feel safety, trust, and empathy in relationships. Silence, however, prevents the exchange of cues, signals, and emotional responses necessary for this process. The avoidant may physically be present, but physiologically and emotionally they remain disconnected. The nervous system, trained to shut down rather than engage, cannot participate fully in relational attunement. The long-term effect is that avoidance becomes self-reinforcing. Each act of silence conditions the body to respond to relational intimacy with withdrawal, creating a physiological expectation of disconnection. Emotional responsiveness diminishes, empathy is constrained, and the capacity for vulnerability is weakened. Even in situations where connection is safe, the avoidance nervous system responds as if danger is present, creating patterns of mistrust, emotional distance, and relational frustration. Ultimately, silence is more than just a behavioral choice for the avoidant. It is a form of conditioning for the body. It teaches the nervous system to constrict, detach, and protect, rather than expand, engage, and connect. While it may reduce immediate anxiety, it also reduces the capacity to experience love, intimacy, and emotional fulfillment. True transformation requires retraining the nervous system to recognize safety and connection, to tolerate vulnerability without retreating, and to allow emotional engagement as a path to growth rather than as a threat. Until this retraining occurs, silence remains a powerful teacher. It protects the ego, but it hardens the body, limits the heart, and restricts the soul from experiencing the full depth of love. Silence may feel powerful short-term, but it weakens love long-term because for the avoidant, withdrawing can create a deceptive sense of control. In the moment, retreating into quiet may seem like strength, a way to protect oneself from emotional overwhelm, vulnerability, or potential rejection. The avoidant may think, if I don't engage, I won't get hurt, and for a fleeting instant, this feels empowering. There is no conflict, no demand for emotional exposure, no risk of disappointment. The ego feels shielded, the mind feels safe, and the illusion of mastery gives a temporary sense of power over the situation. But power built on withdrawal is fragile, superficial, and ultimately corrosive to the very thing the avoidant may secretly desire most, connection and love. While silence can reduce immediate discomfort, it also diminishes the richness of relational experience. Love is an active force. It requires participation, dialogue, empathy, and vulnerability. When the avoidant withdraws, they stop engaging in the essential processes that nourish love. Unspoken words, unexpressed emotions, and unmet needs accumulate over time, forming a silent barrier that both protects and isolates. The avoidant may feel temporarily relieved, but the partner feels distance, confusion, or rejection, even if no overt conflict occurs. In this way, silence creates the illusion of strength for one person, while generating emotional weakness and disconnection for the relationship as a whole. Silence also limits the growth of intimacy. Intimacy is not just about proximity or shared experiences. It is about the willingness to be seen, heard, and understood. It thrives on dialogue, vulnerability, and emotional reciprocity. When silence dominates, the avoidant effectively withholds a crucial component of relational health, emotional transparency. Over time, the heart that is denied expression begins to shrink, the bond that is starved of attention begins to erode, and the connection that is starved of engagement begins to weaken. The relationship may continue to function on the surface, but its depth, vitality, and resilience are gradually compromised. Another consequence of prolonged silence is the amplification of misunderstanding. When the avoidant retreats, the partner is left to interpret the absence of communication. Gaps in understanding are filled with assumptions, fears, and projections, often leading to conflict that is entirely preventable. The avoidant silence may be intended as a protective measure, but the relational ecosystem interprets it as emotional unavailability, disinterest, or rejection. Over time, these patterns create a self-fulfilling cycle. The avoidant withdraws. The partner distances emotionally, and the relationship deteriorates further, despite the avoidant's original intention to maintain control or peace. Silence also impacts the avoidant's own capacity to love fully. Love is not a static feeling, it is a practice of engagement, risk, and reciprocity. By retreating into silence, the avoidant diminishes their ability to practice these skills. Each moment of avoidance trains the nervous system, the mind, and the heart to expect withdrawal as the default response to vulnerability. Over time, the ability to remain present in emotional intimacy diminishes, and the experience of love becomes conditioned by caution rather than courage. What begins as a strategy for survival gradually becomes a limitation on the very capacity for connection that gives life meaning. Ironically, the short-term power of silence is deceptive because it disguises long-term weakness. The avoidant may feel in control, but the heart, the relationship, and even the ego itself suffer from prolonged disconnection. True power in love comes from engagement, presence, and the courage to navigate discomfort, not from retreat. Silence may temporarily protect the self, but it prevents growth, erodes trust, and weakens the foundation of intimacy. Ultimately, silence is a double-edged sword. It shields the avoidant from immediate vulnerability, yet it undermines the vitality of love over time. The sense of control it offers is fleeting, while the cost it exacts on emotional depth, relational strength, and the capacity to connect is profound. Love cannot thrive in the absence of expression, and silence, while tempting as a tool for self-preservation, slowly diminishes the very essence of what the avoidant most fears losing, the opportunity to love deeply and be loved fully. Thank you for sharing your time and thoughts. Wishing you clarity, courage, and endless inspiration ahead. Goodbye for now. May every step you take lead you closer to your heart's deepest desires.